All right, good morning. As Nick said, I'm Patrick Harris. I'm from Global Data Consortium. We're out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm on the product side. And today I just want to talk to you a little bit about our platform worldview. As my slide says up there, we provide the best local intelligence for global electronic identity verification. So before we get into the live demo, I want to talk a little bit about what makes us unique. So what we do very simply is we go in country to find the best data sources within that country, incorporate them into our worldview platform, and do this on an in-country, go in-country and do this country by country. We provide multiple providers and sources to do for multiple use cases for 1+1 or 2+2 verification. And then on the other end, we give you flexible rules and scoring capacities so that you can verify your identities trusted time and time again. This is a little bit of a visual graphic of our platform that we start with the providers, and we go in country, credit, consumer, and so on, and start to aggregate those through our API worldview, and then provide this through the API level with different business rules to your end customer. So let me just show you a little bit about our platform now. So again, we're a back-end API rooted in data quality and data management, right? Master data management. So all of this, what we're showing you right now, is the platform and kind of a visual representation of the platform. So very simply, if I have a shopping cart or something like a batch process that I wanted to run through these, a database or whatever, this is kind of the visual front end of how of what I want to show you today. So what we've got here is just think about this as we've got a few options that we have. We're going to verify identity. We've got other capabilities up here such as options. But what I've done is I populated this input with pretty much identity information such as complete name, date of birth, address, national ID, and we've got phone number and some other kind of identity verification that you can do, phone number and email and such like that. But this is something that we pre-populated it, and I want to make sure that this is not live data right now. It's actually attached to a cache. So what's up here is is probably an author or something from Brazil that we made up as part of our onboarding process for our cache, so that you can do your testing like that. So very simply, this would come in from, like I said, through a third-party app or something like that you would put into your platform. And very simply, through a transaction, I would just submit verification. And we're able to verify that person's identity through an individual data source. So for here, what we give you is we kind of made it very simple that we kind of give you a reliability to say, hey, this is, we score everything in 10s, 20s, and 30s, right? So 10 being the best, so that we're confident this person matches the individual reference data. And then 20 would be more doubtful or probable, and then 30 would be, oh, we don't think this person goes, or this person is a valid identity, right? And then we kind of, all of this is configurable on the back end for you based on your use case, right? So we also give you individual messages and to say this match per data source. and so on. And then we actually give you another layer of information beyond that to say, okay, well, these are the additional data sources that we match with. This is kind of a kind of an aggregated view. Any questions on worldview? Yes, sir. If we have the assets, yep. So it's very simple. It's just a, so you've got multiple data sources on the back end, right, integrated through a single API. So if you have the data source, right, you can integrate that into Worldview. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. So for things like know your customer, right? So you have to verify. What we've kind of found out at this conference is that there's a difference between verification and authentication. So this is the first step. Before you authenticate, you have to identify, right? So this is like, okay, this is saying that I'm on a shopping cart, for instance, that I need to verify this person's identity before I can transact with them, right? This is to say that, hey, I am who I say I am, right? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay, so we've got approximately, I think, 35 countries with greater than 50% coverage. So, which is, by U.S. standard, that's a little bit, okay, but when you get out of the U.S., that's actually very, very good coverage, right? So we look for, part of this is from the challenging aspect is not from necessarily from the business side, is to find those sources. It has to be this two-way relationship with them, right? So to be able to trust each other, be able to tap into their data sources legally and professionally, but also from the tech to be able to integrate those into there. So yes, that kind of is like the high level. We can talk a little bit more maybe afterwards. We've got a booth in the Startup Alley there about the breadth and depth. But that gives you an idea that we're constantly looking from everything from credit, government, consumer, telco, utility, and to provide a plethora of coverage, right? Yes, sir. Or. A full name match, yeah. So it would be like, so each individual element matches per record in the data source, right? Yes, we actually have, if I ran an option called what we call message verbose, right? We would have even more more messages here to say, okay, well, the first name matched in a credit data source, the last name matched in a credit data source, and enumerate them like that. Yeah, did you have a question? How many? I'm sorry? Individuals, it depends on the country, right? The coverage. Some are, like I said, we got. It really depends. Some have 75% coverage, right? It's really dependent on the data source. We can. We've got almost 100 data sources integrated into our platform. But well, it's a distributed ledger, right, or a distributed network. So it's not like we have. I can't say, right. We're firing it off, right. So it's not centralized. Yeah. Yes, sir. So kind of a trust score, right? So that is right now, that is more of a configurable thing. I think that, coverage is obviously part of it, right? So right now, actually the default standard is to weight based on like the elements, right? And we have a default, but like if you wanted to say this data source was more important than this data source or weighted heavily, we can do that on the back end. And I think I'm done. Okay, cool, thank you. Thank you for putting up with me for the first 2 minutes while I warmed up.
Alrighty, thank you, Patrick. And up next, we have Socure, who is not here. All right, so we will skip through Socure, and next up, we have Basis Technology.
All right, and you're going to give me a clock, right? Awesome. So my name is Neil Bruce. I'm with Basis Technology. We're about a 20-year-old natural language processing company. We do text analytics, so think of it as people will use our products. They'll use them to ingest documents from lots of different languages, and then we will do several different layers of analysis on that. We'll figure out what's the language of origin. We can extract entities from those documents. We can then, now with this new product we have, this entity resolution product, we can join and link those entities so that we can help you tell a story around the information in the documents. So I'm going to show you this brand new entity resolution product, which is built on our technology stack. And I'm going to give you two different use cases all within 10 minutes. So the first one is kind of a anti-money laundering / sanctions list use case. So in this scenario, you're a banker, you've got a gentleman who wants to buy a car wash, he's giving you a bunch of documents to help you decide whether or not you want to help finance this car wash. And we can handle both structured and unstructured. So just to give you an example of the documents I'm about to ingest in our system. So you as a bank, you'd have a sanctions list that would typically be a structured document. And this is all just fake data for demonstration purposes. So you'd have that already. And then I've got here an email to employees that was part of the financial information. I've got a cap table, balance sheet. Really, I'm just trying to show that we can handle lots of different documents. We've got a letter here in Korean, which will become more obvious once we do the ingest. So what I'm going to do is I am going to upload these documents. And now is when the system's doing all the things I was mentioning. It's figuring out language of origin, it's extracting entities, it's linking entities together so that you can then do a search. So the name of this fictitious car wash is Speedy Car Wash. We went very creative with that. And here you can see a graph representation of the entities and the associated relationships. So I'll start at the entity level. So what the system does is it looks across all the documents and it figures out which are representing the same entity. So in our example, we try to trick the system a little bit. So one place it was called Speedy Car Wash, other place Speedy Car Wash Inc. You could have a misspelling. Our text analytics is able to catch all those kind of name varieties and cluster them together. But more than that, we can also show relationships between the entities. So I'll hide the fragments to simplify this picture. The basic story that you as a banker could figure out from looking at all this is that Speedy, I'm trying to make this a little bit bigger, Speedy is owned by the Shell Corporation, which is then owned by this guy named Won-ho Kim. Here we have it in Korean. Sorry. You can see it here in different, also in English. And so I don't speak Korean, but you can trust me that that actually says Kim Won-ho, not Won-ho Kim. So we can handle all these kind of name variants, and it's doing the extraction out of in the native language. So as a banker, you're saying, okay, shell company, Won-ho Kim is a guy in North Korea on a sanctions list. I'm probably not going to do this deal. And if I looked at the data for the the kind of profits that this car wash is spinning off, there'd be lots of questions about why this is going down. And so you may decide to give this to your investigative team to look at. I'll show you one other configuration we have. And this has advanced search options. So you can close that off, or you can turn on advanced search, so you could do more specific fielded search. And again, all fuzzy name matching is available. So in this situation, you're either a border intelligence, you're a border person doing an investigation, or you're an intelligence officer, and you're tracking this guy Ashby Ivanov, and you're trying to decide which Ashby am I dealing with. Is this the good Ashby Ivanov or the bad Ashby Ivanov? Because there's lots of Ashby Ivanovs in the world. And so you get this score of how closely these people tie into who you're looking for, and you can drill into individual people that have been clustered together as different entities. I'll pull into this one because this one was put on a watch list. And the thing I'm trying to show off here is we can visualize the data different ways. Here, depending on how many documents, this thing could go on, but you can look at it in a typical table view, or again, you could switch over to a graph view, and you can see that Ashby has a relationship with this guy named Ivan, another Russian who's on a watch list. They've been spending time with the Taliban, so lots of bad stuff going on there. And one thing I wanted to distinguish that we also do is we do not just co-occurrence within the same document, co-reference, but we also do semantic relationships. So in the other example, when it says Acme was acquired, or Acme acquired Speedy, the word acquired is a special semantic word. So it matters more to us that relationship than they just showed up in the same doc. So we have two entities in the same doc are represented by dotted lines like this one here. But then if there's special wording like son of, father of, any of the sibling relationships or certain other relationships like acquired, we will show visually slightly differently because we think it's a stronger relationship. How are we doing? 3 minutes and 50 seconds for questions. Yes?
Do you handle lower resolution scans, type document, fax documents, and the OCR?
We don't do the OCR, so if the OCR is stinky, then it makes it tougher to do the resolution, but we rely on our other people to do OCR. So if organization, let's say an intelligence organization has to deal with that, they would have some other system that would do the OCR translation into text, and then we take it at the point that it's machine readable text. We don't do the OCR, but lots of organizations will already have that problem solved by the time they get to us. Yes?
So how do you establish the context? So you have this list of documents that I understand, and then there is a context that every set of documents should be happening.
Right.
Yeah, the first case you have that acquired and all those, but that's how you can pick up the key terms. So is there a way you can also create those rules or create that context here? Or
Yeah. So these are machine learning systems so that we can train the algorithms to pick up certain key variables. So in this case, variables that are picked up were like the address of Speedy Car Wash or other attributes that we could say it's this Speedy and not another Speedy.
right, but is it in the consumer who's using the software in their hands, or you have to set it up that way?
So we will tune the parameters for the customer, but then one of the things we're doing is we're making it more and more easy for customers to do their own self-tuning.
Right.
Any sort of data collaboration between your clients? So if one customer's uploading documents and then another customer does, and they've got similar entities, can you draw those same relationships across documents? Or,
It's-
in this example, right, you showed Taliban, right? Obviously, Taliban is not going to be in the contract of some bank, but
Right.
you're drawing a relationship there.
Right.
So where are you getting those additional data sources, and are you doing data collaboration?
Right, so we generally, so this was an intelligence narrative, so the intelligence organizations have data. And we're looking at offering knowledge bases as a starting point in case you don't have a knowledge base. So to answer the data question, we can build a knowledge base on the fly with no knowledge. We'll just ingest and create entities and add them to the knowledge base, or we can link to existing knowledge bases. And we're investigating, this is a brand new product, we've been working on this for about 3 months. We're looking at partners who might have a knowledge base that you would want to link to. So whether it's Thomson Reuters or all the different vendors who offer different knowledge bases. Yes?
Do you have the ability to kind of extract data out of there? So if, for example, your company has like a Salesforce database, you want to be able to pull out that, oh, what's the parent hierarchy? Here's the parent company, the holding company, the ultimate parent, and all that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And another use case could be, I'm a company and I bought another company, and one company calls their customer Coke and the other one calls it Coca-Cola Corporation, and you can sync those together. That's a more mundane but practical use or identity resolution. I've got 30 seconds. Any takers? Or I could finish early. One last.
For every relation, do you also extract the names of the relations?
So ask the question again.
For every relation in the CR diagram, do you extract the names of the relations for every relationship?
Yeah, for a relationship to exist, there has to be two entities for the relationship to be connecting. So there's always the entity is kind of the central molecule, and then we can connect them through relationships.
Relation names as well.
The names of relationships? So there are, yes, we have a list, and it's a growing list of what I'll call special words that indicate a type of relationship. And so we have a specific SDK or API for that component, which is the relationships between entities. And we're always looking for customers to figure out custom entities, custom relationships. So it could be a container, it could be a missile, it could be lots of things that could be an entity, and then the relationships could vary. And I think I'm out of time. So thank you very much.
Up next, we have IDMe. So, I'll just set this up. Gotcha.
No, it's on the floor.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Pradeep Sampath. I work with IDMe on the product and design side. We're in the business of helping individuals secure digital identities. And those of you who are familiar with the NIST guidelines know that it involves two key facets. You need to have them identity proved, and the proved identity needs to be set up with a multi-factor authentication. And for a number of years, we've been doing this in a 100% purely remote online basis, and we've enjoyed tremendous success rates, up to 87% of individuals who go through our online flow have been able to get identity proved, and that's a pretty high number considering the bar that NIST has set for the high assurance credentials. However, we've also understood that there are a number of individuals for whom it's hard to get identity proved online. So we're in the process of creating a bunch of solutions which leaves no identity behind, if I can say it that way. These are the kind of individuals who find it hard to be identity proofed in a completely self-service online manner. People with thin files, folks who have limited credit history or don't wish to remove the freeze that they may have on their credit files, or even older senior citizens who may be uncomfortable with doing online identity proofing by taking pictures and scanning documents and so on and so forth. And so for those individuals, we have a solution that I'm going to demonstrate today, and it's called a trusted referee-based in-person identity proofing, which is based on a phone, an app that's on the phone. And identity proofing in this scenario can occur in a couple different ways. You can either start online and finish it in person, or you can completely finish identity proofing in person, or there's a hybrid of both approaches. Who are these individuals? We call them referees in our app. And the individuals can be any one of these folks who are in a position of trust. Just like notaries are in a position of trust, if you're identity proofing a physician, it could be the HR staff within the hospital system, or it could be administrators in schools, or it could be veteran service organizations to identity proof veterans. So these are the individuals who would use our iOS or Android app and help verify the identity of individuals and create credentials that are useful for them online. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick demonstration of that. Because it's a phone app, I'll go ahead and do the demonstration from a browser emulation here. Right now, the app is available on iOS. The referee that I mentioned a moment ago, they'd install this on their phone, and they themselves have been credentialed previously, right? So the referee has received a high assurance credential, and they're going to use that credential and go through the identity proofing process and help others achieve the same level of assurance. We'll log into the app. And in this case, I'm the referee. I'm going to call myself Randy in this case. I use my first factor, which is my email and a password, and I sign in. And I had opted to use text message as my second factor. So I'm prompted to use my text message, which is second factor. I'll input that in, and I'm signed in. I'm signed into the app. The app greets me by name. Now what's happening is, the situation is an applicant. We'll call the person whose identity needs to be verified as an applicant. The applicant is sitting across the table from me, the referee. And I'm going to start a new application. I'll read the consent to the applicant, letting them know that we're going to collect PII, personally identifiable information, from them in this session, and it'll be used with their consent to verify their identity. We'll get a quick on-screen signature from the applicant. His name is Phil. You'll see in a moment. Phil signs this. We'll go ahead and sign Phil. We'll type in Phil's email address. And we start with this because that's how we determine who this individual is. Are they completely new, or have they started identity proofing online, and do we need to pick up where they left off? So we get their email address into the system. And a phone number is an important aspect to it, because that individual themselves, they're going to be set up with a second factor authentication, which typically requires a SMS or a voice. And there are more advanced methods of second factor, like a FIDO key and an authenticator app and so on and so forth. But to keep things simple for this audience group, we're going to assume that they brought their phone, put their phone number in, and get that ready to be used as an artifact, not just to verify their identity with, but also set them up with second factor authentication. Once that's done, here's where we look at what documents the applicant has brought. In the online flow, a lot of the identity proofing happens behind the scenes, right? We collect their social security number and hit the authoritative data sources. We look at which phone number the information is coming from, and we hit the mobile network operators to determine that it's a phone in good standing, it's never been part of a fraud ring, there's not been a swim swap associated with it. But in the in-person situation, we're talking about documents, right? They're bringing documents to the table. And we're going to say, what kind of documents have you brought? And for this high assurance example that I'm showing, they need to have brought one primary document, two primary documents, or one primary document and two secondary documents. So the referee will explain that to the applicant, and the app has a quick reference as to what are the list of documents that qualify as primary, and what are the list of documents which qualify as secondary, in case the referee wants to make sure that the applicant has these documents. I'll go ahead and demonstrate an example where they pick a driver's license, and then they hop over to secondary and say, yeah, I brought my social security card, and I've got my birth certificate. And so the app says that these three documents, right, one primary and two secondary documents, combined together, are sufficient for this applicant to get identity proved. We'll go ahead and capture pictures of the document. It guides them through the process of capturing pictures of these various documents. We'll capture the front, we'll capture the back, and this is where we're reading from the PDF, the barcode. It gets the applicant's information from the driver's license, steps the referee through all the documents that need to be captured at this point in time. And I didn't go through all the documents in this demonstration, and we're reviewing the applicant's data at this point, and the applicant has been verified. But what happened behind the scenes is, just like we do in the IDMe online remote flow, we've actually hit some authoritative sources to make sure this is not a synthetic identity. This is not identity that was created with your social, my birth date, your address, and your driver's license number, right? So that check and balance has been in place despite the presentment of all the physical evidences. So in this case, the applicant's identity was verified. We're going to now proceed to securing this account with a second factor authentication. And what happens now is we're going to ask them, how do you want to receive this email? I'm the referee, Randy. Phil, sitting across the table. I'm going to ask Phil, hey, Phil, I'm going to send you a text message to your phone that you brought with you, and you'll read that out to me in a moment. And we'll say this. We'll send the text message. So as the referee, I've initiated a text message to be sent to Phil's phone. Phil's going to read me what that number is. I'll type that into the app, and the binding has now occurred, which means that every time in the future that Phil logs in, that phone which we just did the binding for will receive the second factor authentication. So that's completed. And the final step is NIST requires that the referee also performs self-attestation. And either referee will make sure that, like a notary would say, I verified all the documents myself. I've made sure it's all kosher, and the applicant gets an email with instructions as to how to set up a password, and they can log in. The one point I'll make, and then I'll take a couple questions, is this is an example of how we do the highest level of assurance compliant with NIST guidelines. But we talk to our customers and determine if there's a lower threshold that they're comfortable with. In the sense, if you want to identify patients, maybe it's just a license and a credit card and an insurance card. So the application can be tuned in a way that performs different levels of assurance based on the use case. So that's the IDMe Trusted Referee app. Happy to take some questions. Sir.
Yeah, so as far as the documents, it looks like you capture the documents, but when you actually parse out with the passport number, are you actually binding that passport number to the person, or are you just capturing it and making sure that the quality of the passport looks good?
In this case, we're binding it to the person. And we have to retain records for 7 years. So from auditing purposes, all the documents that were presented, we're capturing images of that, parsing data if and when possible, otherwise we'll hand enter that. But those captured documents are attached to the verified identity for future auditing purposes.
But like at that point in time, though, if I'm going to register for, say, using a passport,
Right.
I'm going to be able to tell that the passport number belongs to that deal. Or you just parse it.
It's just parsing it. It's parsing and saving it. Yeah, of course. Out of time? Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Pradip. And for the last presentation of this session, we will have IdentityMind Global.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Caldera. I'm direct both products and marketing for IdentityMind Global. I'm going to go through a set of slides, and then I'm going to turn to a demo as quick as I can. So we build trusted digital identities. We basically started working on digital identities a long time ago. We build this, and we build digital assets, and we use it for the purposes of risk analysis and compliance, specifically in financial transactions. We've been around since 2014. We have a database of over 210 million identities, and that is growing on a daily basis. And we basically sell our platform, our digital identities, in 3 ways: either the digital identities themselves, which is the digital construct of the digital identities. We use it also for anti-money laundering. Within that, we do KYC, sanction screening, transaction monitoring, and fraud prevention. And we also sell for fraud prevention in e-commerce. Basically, we believe in the KYC is evolving. Obviously, the idea of doing identity verification just based on physical parameters like social security numbers and so forth is limited. It's necessary, obviously, but it's limited in what it can accomplish, given that a lot of the data has been compromised from databases. A lot of the social security number, name, address, phone matching type of technology is useful, but it's limited in what it can do. So we believe that you have to extend that to the actual digital components and digital attributes of those identities, especially when you're online, where those digital attributes are there. So basically, how it works is pretty much in this flow. So we take every transaction that we evaluate, and that can be a payment, that could be a movement of money, that could be a KYC, an onboarding situation. So we take that information, we extract the digital parameters of that, we complement those with the physical parameters, and the first thing we do is what we call an entity link analysis. Basically, we look at those attributes in our database, and we're trying to map them together. Then we go and reach out to our third-party partners. So we have an ecosystem of close to 30 partners that we go and get data sources. And then we take that information, we normalize that, and we see the validation of the attributes that we're looking at. And we look at, again, data validation, we look at social networks, we look at document verification and different things. So we take all of that, and then we apply machine learning, and we apply heuristics and anomaly detection. So the first thing we're trying to weed out from that analysis is basically identity fraud. So anything that has to do with stolen identities or synthetic identities or bots and so forth. All of this information then gets embedded into that digital construct that we call electronic DNA. And then we apply risk analysis and compliance analysis to that information, that construct. So we give this information back to our clients, and they can decide whether the risk is acceptable depending on the solution that they're working on. All of this information then becomes part of the electronic DNA those are the detailed items I've been talking about, and is stored in our database. We see it in the following way. So you have to build a digital identity first, then you have to prove that digital identity. You can then monitor that identity, and then you can reuse it in different applications. So from the perspective of building, as I said before, you can see in the left there's a screenshot of how kind of it looks like. We'll go into that in a minute. But basically, that is the digital construct, and it has all those components that we're talking about. It has the attributes, has the entities, the links, the reputation, authentication mechanisms, affiliation and affinity, and all of that is what makes that digital construct. From the proofing framework perspective, we actually always try to answer 4 different questions. One is that a real user. Basically, we're trying to, once again, try to reduce identity fraud from there. Are the users who they say they are, which is the authentication piece of that? Can I do business with them? It has to do with sanctions. It has to do with all the regulatory components that you may have to take your clients through. And can I do business with them? And this is very important because it measures the risk of dealing with those users. Our ecosystem of partners, many of you are in here. We keep growing, so we want to add as many partners into our ecosystem as possible. And from the part of the proof it then is how then you actually can do things like synthetic identities. So we look at the digital construct that we've built on those identities, and then we use third parties as well, so just to understand that. Then you monitor it, and then depending on how your application, we can monitor degradation of the identity itself, meaning you have a user, but that identity has been compromised later on, for example. We will alert you and say, hey, we've noticed that this identity is no longer the same that it was before, and so forth. We monitor also for suspicious activity in money laundering, so a lot of the movement of money, a lot of our clients are money transmitters, for example, that you have to then represent how that money moves from one entity to another, et cetera. And fraud prevention, which is also part of the both in payments and on money movement. And then reusing it, once you've built that construct and say that you start using it for onboarding, for example, well, then you can reuse it for multiple other things. And what allows you to have is a common taxonomy and common representation of those identities across your company. So if you're in a bank, for example, your risk, your compliance, your KYC teams, your sanction screening team, all those teams are separate, right? So a digital construct then allows you to have a conversation in the same terms with each one of those organizations, and each one of them can then leverage the knowledge that you have about this user. So you encapsulate the risk knowledge that you know about these identities inside that construct that then you can share across organization. All right, let me switch to a demo. So this is basically what the back end would look like. So this is where the financial crime analyst would look at. This is what they would look in the back. So just running an example here, but you would see a transaction that you have to review for whatever reason, and then this is kind of the key thing here. This is electronic DNA I was talking about before. So when you look at that transaction, you may look at this entity, what we call entities in the system, and this could be a user, this could be a bank account, a device, and it could be an address. And the colors represent sort of how much risk we know associated to those users into our database. So basically, red users would be bad in a way, and when you expand how that user looks, then what you can see here, and this is obviously an example, but what we're trying to see is that how that user is basically using a bank account that belongs to a different user, right? So the idea here is that through the network map, through the identity graph, then you can tell actually the risk associated to those transactions. So that's part of it. Then you can add to this kind of where different analysis from third-party vendors. So in this case, we can add MaxMind, but we can add also in real time whatever other services we have in the platform. So from all the different partners that you can choose, what your next steps could be. All of this is either you do this in an ad hoc way, which means that every time that there is risk, you actually want to evaluate in a manual way, or you can embed all of this in automatically. So in the admin portion of the backend, you can get when you have all the rule system in the rule system, then you can basically create how you want the different risk profiles, how you want the different applications. So depending on the risk, depending on the geolocation, depending on whatever you are, you can actually create different profiles that analyze that information. So the risk analysis, the compliance analysis is subject to a specific jurisdiction. For example, if you're having to authenticate users in the United States, for example, the rules are different than if you do it in Canada or you're doing it in Germany and so forth. So through the system, you can configure the different jurisdictions that you want to apply and the different risk levels. So for example, if you were doing a KYC transaction, then you have the option of breaking apart that KYC in different stages. So for example, the first stage, I want to do sanction screening. So if that passes, then I may want to do, for example, I may want to do identity data validation, right? So I can use one of our partners, Idology, to actually do that verification. If that fails, then I can move to out-of-wallet questions, for example, or then I can move to document validation. So all of this can be configured in the system, and you can have basically a logic that, depending on the risk that you're looking at your users or your transactions, then it can become more severe or you can have more scrutiny on those transactions. All right, have 6 seconds. I made it in 10 minutes. All right, any questions or no time for question? All right, any questions, anyone?
You get one question.
Yeah, I get one question. All right, if not, we are in the booth out there. Happy to take, oh, there you go.
So you build the database of relationships and businesses and stuff.
Yes.
Third major GDPR challenges then in Europe.
Interestingly, so we actually were GDPR compliant from the beginning, given that the way that we choose to build our database is all cryptographic representations of the data. So we actually don't have the PII data that is there, but we have representations of the data that we can use for matching and analysis. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jose. That will conclude our verification session. Be sure to check out all of these demo session participants in the exhibitor space. They will be exhibiting and would love to show you more about their products. So thank you all so much.